Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're embarking on a pretty fascinating intellectual journey straight into the heart of classical Islamic scholarship. We're going to demystify exactly how these classical scholars approach and analyze the Quran. As you can appreciate from the beautiful Islamic illuminated borders setting the stage for us here, we're peeling back the layers of some very ancient methodology. We'll explore the sheer rigor it takes to move from a basic surface-level translation to uncovering the truly profound, hidden meanings of the text. All right, let's just dive right in. So let's start with our central mystery. Imagine you've got a translation of a sacred text right in your hands. You read it, and it feels, well, pretty straightforward. But we really have to ask a deeper question here. Can a surface-level reading, especially in an entirely different language, ever truly capture the full intended gravity of a divine text? Well, classical scholars argue that a simple translation barely even scratches the surface. In fact, a translation alone might literally miss the core message entirely if you don't have the right historical and linguistic keys.
Which brings us to part one, the art of uncovering, styled here with some incredibly elegant Arabic calligraphy. To begin peeling this onion, we need to start with the outermost layer and define our terms. The absolute foundational tool of the trade for any classical scholar is a science known as tafsir. The Arabic root word fasara literally means to explain, to uncover, or to make something entirely clear. Think of it like physically grabbing a heavy, obscure veil and lifting it off an object that's been hidden in the dark. That is exactly what tafsir does to a dense piece of text. It illuminates what's actually there.
Now, what makes this absolutely fascinating is a specific classical analogy that really drives the point home. Ancient scholars pointed out that the word tafsir shares a root with tafsira, and tafsira was actually a classical medical term used by early physicians. So just as a doctor uses a tafsira as a diagnostic tool to figure out what's hidden deep inside the human body, a mufassir, or scholar of the Quran, diagnoses the hidden, highly nuanced meanings buried within the divine text. They aren't just casually reading, they are diagnosing. Let's put this in a modern context. Imagine you're operating a highly complex, heavy-duty piece of machinery. Reading a basic translation is kind of like reading the instruction manual that simply says, activate emergency mode. Sure, you know the words, but you don't necessarily understand the underlying mechanics, right? Tafsir is like having the master engineer standing right next to you explaining exactly how the machine's gears shift, what valves open, and what that mode actually accomplishes. It removes all of the confusion. Moving right along to part two, discovering the deeper meaning, set against this intricate geometric Islamic pattern. Okay, let's see how this builds. Once we've got the basic explanation down, we have to go deeper. We move to the second layer of our analysis, the science of Taweel. If tafsir explains the vocabulary, Taweel goes a vital step further. The root awala literally means to return something back to its origin. So, in scholarly terms, it asks the ultimate question: what did the author ultimately intend by these words? What's the actual core objective behind the vocabulary? We can actually illustrate the difference between these two sciences using a specific verse. When the Quran says, "Indeed your Lord is in observation," using the Arabic word mirsad, tafsir handles the vocabulary. It tells us mirsad linguistically means to watch or observe from a vantage point. But ta'wil extracts the overarching moral warning. It tells us the verse's ultimate purpose isn't just about the physical act of watching, it's a profound warning to humanity that absolutely no sin escapes the knowledge of the divine. The absolutely crucial point here is found in Imam al-Maturidi's famous distinction regarding intellectual humility. He states that tafsir is declaring a meaning with absolute certainty, and that's based on hard, undeniable evidence, like established grammar rules and authentic historical traditions. Ta'wil, on the other hand, is the scholar's careful, meticulous process of weighing probabilities. They're choosing the strongest possible meaning based on context, but they maintain this deep humility of not claiming absolute certainty over God's ultimate intent. Think about a modern legal clause. If a park sign says, "Vehicles prohibited," tafsir is the straightforward realization that, yeah, a car is obviously a vehicle. But Taweel is the deep contextual debate lawyers have over whether a motorized wheelchair or an electric scooter breaks the intended spirit of that rule. It requires intense deduction, a solid grasp of why the rule was written in the first place, and a rigorous application of logic. Which leads us to part three, Beyond Simple Translation, featuring some really subtle, beautiful motifs of Islamic academic heritage. Having clearly defined our terms,
we now step into the staggering weight of the classical scholar's task. A true interpreter, a mufessir, cannot just know conversational Arabic. Before they even think about analyzing a single line of text, they have to master a frankly staggering list of sciences. We're talking advanced grammar, the historical reasons for revelation, intricate legal frameworks, shifting timelines of abrogation, and ancient rhetoric. It is, quite literally, a lifetime of multidisciplinary study. Imam al-Kushairi links this rigorous standard directly to prophetic traditions to show exactly how these two disciplines overlap. He points out that tafsir relies heavily on riwayah, that's the accurate, mathematically precise, chain-backed transmission of historical reports. Meanwhile, Taweel relies on dirayah, that is the brilliant, scholarly deduction and deep analytical reasoning applied to those verified reports to actually extract practical rulings. And this dynamic perfectly demonstrates why these sciences were absolutely essential from day one. During the time of revelation, the Prophet's companions were native, masterful Arabic speakers. Yet when a verse was revealed warning against wrongdoing, or zulm, they were terrified. They thought it meant everyday mistakes and minor sins would completely ruin their faith. They needed the Prophet's authoritative tafsir to explain that wrongdoing in this specific context actually meant polytheism, or shirk. Language alone just wasn't enough. They needed that authoritative context. Now for part 4, why do we need it? Accompanied here by a very serene traditional archway design. This brings us to a vital crossroads and, honestly, a highly logical, fair question. If this book describes itself as a clear guide for all of humanity, and it's meant to be accessible, why on earth do we need such a complex, multi-layered, rigorous system of scholarly interpretation? Why such a steep barrier to entry? Well, the master scholar Imam al-Suyuti outlines 3 really elegant reasons to resolve this tension. First, the absolute highest form of eloquence packs massive, cascading layers of legal and spiritual meaning into the briefest of words. Second, crucial historical context is often implicitly assumed by the text and has to be uncovered for later generations. And third, classical Arabic words inherently carry multiple, equally valid literal meanings that simply have to be carefully selected. Let's use a quick modern analogy everyone can grasp instantly. If I just say the English word bank to you, are you grabbing your fishing rod or your checkbook? You have absolutely no idea until I give you a full sentence to establish context, right? Just like that, classical Arabic words require a master scholar to look at the surrounding text, the history, and the grammar to identify the correct context and the true intent behind the vocabulary. And that brings us to part 5, the ultimate intellectual challenge, glowing with an amazing golden Islamic star pattern. The scholar al-Huwayi beautifully captures the ultimate paradox of this whole discipline. He says it's simultaneously easy and terribly difficult. Why? Because you're deciphering the intent of the divine. Unlike a human author, you can't just call up the speaker, schedule an interview, and say, "Hey, can you clarify this confusing paragraph?" The scholar carries the immensely heavy burden of getting it right based on textual and historical evidence alone. So, to summarize our journey together today, Tafseer provides the direct, evidence-based explanation of the literal wording. Ta'weel, on the flip side, is the careful, scholarly deduction of the deeper implications and ultimately intended meanings. And the thing is, they aren't competing ideas at all. They work in perfect harmonious tandem. One provides the solid foundation of vocabulary and history, and the other builds the towering structure of moral and legal application. Imam al-Suyuti actually concludes his monumental chapter with a really powerful statement. He declares tafsir the absolute noblest of all Islamic sciences. Why? Because it studies the highest possible subject, the speech of the divine. It strives for the highest possible goal, human salvation and clarity of belief. And it successfully fulfills a universal human need for moral clarity and guidance in a really confusing world. So I want to leave you with a profound thought to chew on. The next time you open a sacred text and read a simple translation in your native language, ask yourself, what massive layers of profound wisdom, complex history, and divine intent are still waiting in the dark to be uncovered? Translation is just the door. Interpretation is the house itself. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.